The hum of the generator on my ranch had always been comforting. It was the sound of self-sufficiency, the proof that I didn't need to rely on the unreliable local grid. But one sweltering afternoon, as I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea in hand, something odd caught my attention. My generator was working harder than usual, louder, longer. It wasn't the normal background buzz, it was strained, like it was being milked beyond its capacity. At first I thought maybe it was just the heat wave driving my system into overdrive. But when my electric bill came in and the numbers didn't add up, suspicion started gnawing at me. I wasn't even pulling that much power inside my home. I lived a pretty modest life for someone who owned 40 acres of ranch land. A couple of AC units, barn lights, some irrigation pumps, and the house appliances. Nothing extravagant. Yet the readings showed massive spikes at odd hours. It's usually late at night. That was when I noticed the extension cords, behind the tall shrubs that lined the far end of my property. Bright orange and yellow cables snaked like unwelcome vines, disappearing into the neighbor's yard. And whose yard was that? None other than Karen's, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. An HOA I wasn't even a part of because my ranch predated the subdivision by decades. She'd tried countless times to rope me into her little kingdom of rules and fines, but I'd laughed every time she brought it up. Karen didn't like no for an answer. And now, apparently, she was stealing my electricity. The first time I knocked on Karen's door. I was civil, Karen, I said, gesturing toward the obvious tangle of cords. You mind explaining why your house is plugged into my property? Like a phone at an airport charging station. She rolled her eyes, folding her arms. Oh, don't be dramatic, Rick. It's just a temporary measure. Our HOA-approved power system has been inconsistent, and you've got way more than you need. Consider it community sharing. Community sharing. I snapped. You're stealing from me, Karen smirked. Please. You wouldn't even notice if you weren't snooping. Besides, you should be thanking me. I've been generous enough not to report your generator to the HOA. It's hideous. Completely violates our aesthetic guidelines. I almost laughed in her face. I'm not in your HOA, Karen. You have no jurisdiction over my ranch. But she only leaned in closer, whispering like she was holding the upper hand. Everyone in this neighborhood answers to me eventually. I pulled the cords out right there and tossed them back into her yard. I figured that was the end of it. But with people like Karen, it's never that easy. The next week, I noticed the cords were back. This time they were buried shallowly under the soil, like she thought I wouldn't notice. My generator was groaning again, and when I traced the buried line, it led right back to her house. This wasn't petty theft anymore. This was thousands of dollars worth of power being siphoned off. Power I paid for, maintained and fueled myself. I confronted her again, and she had the audacity to laugh. Do what you want, Rick. You're wasting your breath. If you unplug me again, I'll fine you. You'll what? I asked. She pulled out a bright pink slip of paper that had HOA citation written across the top. For harassment, for damaging HOA property, for violating community trust. I crumpled the paper and threw it back on her porch. Karen, you're insane, she called after me as I walked away. Don't test me. The HOA owns this street, and if I want your ranch included, I'll make it happen. That was the last straw. I went down to the sheriff's office the next morning. Sheriff Daniels had been a friend of mine for years. He knew all about Karen and her antics. She had a reputation around town for calling the cops on her neighbors for things like fences being 2 inches too high or grass growing half an inch too long. Rick, he said with a chuckle as I explained. Sounds like she's finally crossed into criminal territory finally. I raised an eyebrow. He nodded. We've had more complaints about her than any other HOA president in the county. But theft of utilities? That's not a neighborhood squabble. It's a crime. Let's do this by the book. We set up a sting. I installed a smart meter on my generator and had it log every watt being drawn. Then I set up cameras along the fence line where the cords crossed into her yard. It didn't take more than 2 nights before the evidence piled up. Karen was running her entire house. Lights, air conditioning, washer and dryer. Even her electric car charger, all through my power. When I showed the sheriff, he shook his head in disbelief. She's bold. I'll give her that. All right. Rick, Let's make this a lesson she won't forget. The sheriff didn't just want to cite her quietly. He wanted to make it public. People like Karen thrived on intimidation, gossip, and control. If she was humiliated in front of her loyal HOA followers, it would break her spell over them. So one Saturday morning, when the HOA was having its monthly community walk, where Karen strutted down the street pointing out supposed violations, Sheriff Daniels and I showed up. Karen was in the middle of berating an elderly neighbor about non-regulation shutters when the sheriff cleared his throat. "Karen Miller," he said loudly, holding a clipboard. "We've got reports of utility theft linked directly to your property." Karen froze. "Excuse me, that's ridiculous. I'm the president of the HOA. I uphold the law around here." Daniels gestured toward me, and I stepped forward holding one of the thick cords I'd yanked from her yard. "Really? Then what's this doing running from my ranch into your basement?" The crowd of neighbors gasped. Karen turned beet red. That's HOA business. Rick agreed to contribute to the community fund." I cut her off. "No, I didn't. You've been stealing my electricity for weeks. I've got the footage, the meter logs, and witnesses." The sheriff didn't waste time. He walked right up to Karen's outdoor breaker box, pulled the plug, and with a loud snap, shut down her entire house. The lights flickered off the air. Conditioning died, and even her garage door stopped mid-motion until further notice. Daniels announced, "This residence is disconnected. You'll be facing charges for theft of utilities." The entire HOA group was silent, staring at their fearless leader as her house went dark. Then the whispers started. People pointing, shaking their heads, muttering. Karen had built her reputation on being untouchable. And now, in front of everyone, she'd been exposed. Karen tried to recover. She sputtered excuses, claiming she had authorization and that this was all a misunderstanding. But the sheriff wasn't buying it, and neither were her neighbors in. The days that followed, I heard rumors that half the HOA board resigned out of embarrassment. Others started pushing to have her removed as president altogether. Without her intimidation tactics and loud voice, the group suddenly realized how toxic she'd been all along. As for me, I filed charges, and the county prosecutor took the case seriously. The cost of the stolen electricity, plus damages to my generator from being overworked, added up to several $1,000s. Karen ended up with hefty fines and probation, and the best part, her own house had to be inspected for illegal wiring. And until it was cleared, she had to live without power. The mighty HOA queen, reduced to candles and battery lamps, while the rest of us carried on. Months later, Karen eventually slunk away from the neighborhood altogether, selling her house at a loss. Word was, she tried starting over in another community, but her reputation followed her. Nobody wanted her as their HOA president anymore. I went back to sitting on my porch, iced tea in hand, listening to the calm, steady hum of my generator. This time, though, it was the sound of victory. And every time I saw that old extension cord in my shed, I couldn't help but smile. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, beats watching the sheriff unplug an HOA. Karen in front of her entire audience.